Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a 11 game NBA slate for you. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? Also, look into the links in the description below for YouTube memberships and also for Discord. Make sure to check both those things out. Discord's a lot of fun, got a lot of cool people in there. And if you get the YouTube membership, then you can get all the write-ups for the different things. I've already posted an NBA and an NHL DFS thing. I will also post a prop bets for NHL, which we've been doing a lot this season, and those are doing really good. So make sure to check those things out if you want to as well. So let's go ahead and get into the slate. We have a big injury report for the slate. So for the Grizzlies, Morant, Adams, Clark, Aldama, and Luke Kennard are all out. For the Pistons, Bojan Bogdanovic and Monte Morris are out. For the Hornets, Cody Martin and Miles Bridges are out. For the Heat, Josh Richardson is out. For the Cavs, Jarrett Allen and Ricky Rubio are out. For the Knicks, Nicholas Claxton is out. For the Warriors, Draymond Green is out. And for the Kings, Trey Lyles remains out. So let's go ahead and get into the slate. I do have some core plays in here with Donovan Mitchell and Day'Ron Sharpe. I will get into those later. Just to note real quick that Day'Ron Sharpe is contingent on him starting with Claxton out. It looks like he will start, but we'll have to wait and see to get confirmation. So let's go ahead and get into the slate. So we're going to start with our point guards, and we're going to start looking at Luka Doncic. Obviously, he had a monster game against the Spurs in Game 1, and I look for him to have another monster game here against Brooklyn. He's got a lot of upside. He has triple-double potential every time out, and he did that in Game 1, which gives him a bigger boost as well. His price rose a couple $100. He's going to be in this price range all season long. This is going to be the first home game, so he's going to look to show out here. I think he's going to have a great game in this one. Then we're going to look at Donovan Mitchell, who is a core play for me. He's nice and cheap here. He does face Shea Alexander here, but I look for him to go back and forth with Shea in this game, and he's cheaper between the two. He had a monster game against Brooklyn as well, and I look for him to continue being a big focus of this offense. He's a great player, and he's a lot of fun to watch, and he's going to have a strong game here with the pace-up situation against against Oklahoma City. Then we're going to look at De'Aaron Fox here for Sacramento. Now, he does have a tough matchup here against the Warriors, but he actually dominated the Warriors last season, and I look for him to have a big game here. He did have some trouble with Utah. Granted, they got the win, so it didn't matter, but he should get shots better in this one. I will note that if Chris Paul guards him, then that could hurt him a little bit, but I do think he's probably just too fast in that situation as well. I look for him to get a 45 fantasy point game at minimum here, and he's a great option on the slate. Then we're going to look at Jamal Murray for Denver. Now, he's had a huge game in Game 1, even though he had a solid game in Game 1 where he scored a lot of points, got some assists and stuff. I look for him to be a little bit more focal point on this particular game due to the matchup here against Memphis. He's got a lot of upside here. His ceiling is in the 50s, and he's sub $8,000, which is nice. His floor is a little bit lower than some in his range, but he's got a great finish last season, and he started this season pretty good as well. And there's no John Morant on the other side, so I suspect he will be a focal point today. Then we're going to look at Chris Paul. Now, he's still too cheap here, assuming that the situation there continues and he gets that, and the situation continues to be where he gets 30 minutes a game. As long as that holds true, his price will rise more and his upside will be very good. Though he did raise up $1,000 from his first game, he was way too cheap against Phoenix. But this is a great matchup for him to have a big game in, as the Kings like to run, and so he's going to have more potential in this one. Then for a value play here, we're going to look at Kobe White. Let's see, where'd he go? For Chicago. Now, he had a little bit of a rough game in Game 1, but he still paid off with 27 fantasy points. Chicago really didn't even show up in that game, but they got a good matchup here against Toronto, and I look for them to bounce back here and have a big game. He's still just too cheap for his potential, and that gives him a lot of upside in this one, so I think he's a viable option as a good value play here. Moving into shooting guards, obviously Donovan Mitchell can play here as well. And then we're going to look at Terry Rozier for Charlotte. Now, he had a really solid first game, and he was pretty good all season last year. The matchup here is also very favorable to him, so that gives it a lot of upside. Obviously, with ball playing, he has a little bit of a limit there, but I look for him to have a really good upside situation, as he's going to be a focal point for this team. for most of the season. So as long as he's playing well, then he's going to be somebody that I like to roster. He has a really good fantasy point potential every time on the court. Then we're going to look at Jalen Green for Houston. Now, Houston's a mess, but you have a couple guys on their team that is viable, and he's one of them. He's only $6,300. His price here is really solid, and he's had one bad game versus Spurs last season, but he's good most of the games, and he had some nice upside when in this price range. The Rockets suck, but he's a guy who can pour in the fantasy points. He has good fantasy point potential. He really didn't shoot the ball well against Orlando, but I look for him to bounce back and have a solid game. He's going to get plenty of minutes if he's playing well. Then we're going to look at Karis LeVert. Now for Cleveland, he is coming off the bench. Now his price is pretty cheap. Obviously, when he starts, he's much more viable. But he got 30 minutes in game one, and he shot 17 shots. I look for him to continue that in this one, especially in a pace-up game. And so he's going to have a lot of opportunity for a solid game. Even if you take away the block and the steal that he got in game one, he's going to have the viability in this one. So he looks like a great option here, and he's nice and cheap. Moving to small forwards here, we're going to start with Jimmy Buckets. Now, Jimmy had a big game in game one. I look for this game to be very intense, and I look for him to go into to beast mode, Jimmy mode here because of the matchup against Boston, a team who he did very well against last season, and so I look for him to have some nice upside here. He's also not too expensive. I do expect his price to rise. It actually dropped a few $100s from the last game, so take that as what you will. But I think he's a great option on the slate. DeMar DeRozan also just underpriced now. He had a decent game where he managed to pay off barely, even though that the Bulls really didn't show up in their first game against Oklahoma City. I expect the Bulls to come out with a lot of motivation in this one, and I look for him to have a big game as a result. He's usually a pretty consistent player, and even when they didn't really do that well, he still managed to score 20 points and score 34 fantasy points. So I look for him to bounce back here and have a big game and have a ton of upside as a result. Then we're going to look at Michael Porter Jr. For Denver. Now, he's a very streaky player, so do keep that in mind, but him and both Aaron Gordon both are typically pretty streaky. His floor to ceiling is somewhere anywhere from 10 to 45 fantasy points, which is annoying on a big slate. But that said, if he has a big game, which he's capable of, he can probably be in the perfect lineup. So that does make him a play for GPPs, but you just have to be more careful with him when it comes to the cash game type situations. Then we're going to look at Jeremy Sochan. Let's see. For San Antonio. Now, he had a big game in game one, and so he's going to get some look this second game because of how good he played against Dallas, and he has got a very plus matchup here against Houston. That said, you want to temper that expectation a little bit. His price range is pretty high for what his range is. He started all of last season and had he had a whole bunch of low games. Now, he did start as point guard, so that does give him some upside as well with the assist potential, but again, he is a little bit risky. I don't necessarily expect him to get 8 rebounds again in this one, and so he's going to be up and down, but he definitely is viable here as long as he's drawing starts. But he's high risk, high reward. Then Karis LeVert could also play here at small forward, and then Grant Williams for the Dallas Mavericks. He showcased that he's going to be the third scoring option on this team starting lineup. However, Doncic and Kyrie both take a lot of shots. I still think he's going to have some good opportunity to have some big games here. And while his price is cheap, he's going to have some upside. Obviously, this game one, he played 35 minutes, and if he can continue to play those kind of minutes, then that'll give him some viability here. And this game for Brooklyn, they're not going to have their center in Claxton, so he's going to have some more potential from that perspective as well. But do keep in mind that he does tend to have sometimes foul trouble situations when he plays a lot of minutes, so do just be aware of that. Maybe in the power forwards, we're going to look at Julius Randle. He had an absolutely monster game in game one, and he didn't even shoot the ball very well, so I look for him to bounce back in the shooting perspective in this game against Atlanta. He still managed a 5x last game, so I look for him to have a positive matchup here. He actually just passed the ball very well last game, and so that gives him a lot of upside. Even against Boston's tough defensive presence in this paint, I look for him to be a great option again today, and he has a lot of upside in this matchup. Then we'll look at Evan Mobley for Cleveland. Now, He didn't succeed in game one, but he's got a better matchup here, and he has the minutes in this one to dominate. Without Jarrett Allen, he should have a lot of upside. It's a little surprising they didn't do well last game, but his price still jumped $1,000 because of this matchup, and so I look for him to have some good upside. Though he does have a low ceiling, or sorry, low floor. He has a high ceiling. Then we'll look at Jaren Jackson Jr. for Memphis. Now he's similar to Mobley, that he's in a really good situation. Obviously, Xavier Tillman kind of stole the show in game one of the season against the Pelicans, and that was a tough matchup. Of course, the tough matchups do not get any easier, as now he's facing the Joker in the paint, but I still think that he's got to have some potential here, and so he's in play, but he's high risk, high reward. DeMar DeRozan can also play here at power forward. Looking at Jabari Smith Jr. for Houston, he's another guy for Houston that has some utility here. I expect them to play better in this game against the Spurs. His defense is a little bit lacking right now. He's got some upside in this matchup. The Rockets are a mess, though he didn't have a great game in game one. He does have a low floor, but he has a high ceiling at this price point, and so gives him some viability here. And then Kevin Love for the Heat. He did draw the start in game one, and that gives him a lot of potential here. If he draws the start again, then that will give him some utility. He played 28 minutes, and he got some rebounds and got some points, and I think he's definitely capable of that again here. So we'll have to see if he continues to start the season. But as long as he does, then he'll be somebody to consider. He didn't have a huge, a fantasy output last season, but he's cheap here, and that gives him some utility. Then we're going to look at our centers, and we'll look at Joker. Joker here for Denver. Obviously, he's extremely expensive. He's going to be somewhat hard to roster at this price point, but he has as much triple-double potential as anybody on the slate. He is the best player in the NBA. I mean, do you really need a giant explanation of why you might consider him? That said, the price does make him somewhat hard to roster, but he is a viable option here. You could also put Jaren Jackson Jr., Julius Randle, and Evan Mobley at this position. But another guy I really like today is Vucevic for the Bulls. He is still just too cheap here at $7,200. He came up a couple $100 from game one, and even though he didn't play well in that game, he managed to get 3 steals and 2 blocks when it comes to the fantasy perspective, which gave him a lot of boost to his fantasy point, and so he almost paid off. He just didn't shoot the ball much, and he didn't really go after a ton of rebounds, but he's going to have a lot more opportunity in this game, and I look for him to be motivated in this one to have a good game again, and probably score more points. Then we'll look at Duran for Detroit. Now he's got a very favorable matchup here against Charlotte, and he had a nice big game in game one. I don't expect him to be that good, but he still has that potential. He's cheap enough to have a lot of upside here and has a good matchup, though he is high risk, high reward, but with the situation there, he's got some upside. And then we'll look at Sharp, who is a core play, assuming he draws a start. Now, let's uh, you know, be cognizant of the fact that he started 3 games last season, and in those 3 games, he was over 25 fantasy points in all 3. This is a very tiny sample size, regardless. If he does draw the start, he's got potential and is dirt cheap, and I think he's going to be heavily used if he does draw that start, which it looks like he will. He came off the bench in game 1 and played 12 minutes, and he does look like he's going to be the backup uh, for Nicholas Claxton when Claxton's healthy, but I do think he's a good option here to be a good play on a slate like this, especially in a good match against Dallas, and so I look for him to be viable here. Some other value plays to consider today are Mitchell Robinson, Alec Burks, and Nick Richards, though they are all definitely high risk, high reward. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.